All right. Can we hear each other?
I can hear you.
All right. I don't know if that's live or not, but anyway, it's about time to begin.
Sounds good. With the camera view, will it be all of us on the screen at the same time, or will it be the active speaker, that whoever's the active speaker, then the camera's focused just on them, like previous times?
I think this will be all of us at once most of the time.
Okay.
All right. I've just got to turn these slides into PDFs. And I think the sound is live here, actually.
And will this be live streamed? Is this live stream?
Live stream. I think we're actually on board right now. In fact, let me go ahead and get it started. Well, we got a minute.
And how's my connection?
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Remedial Protestantism podcast. This is our eighth podcast. And so let's make sure we've got everybody on board here. I want to welcome our guests here, and that is Liam and Andrew. So Liam comes to us. Tell us where you're from, Liam, so we can get that context, and we'll introduce Andrew again.
Cool thing. So I live in Melbourne, Australia, and Melbourne, at least for the most part of the pandemic, was the part of the world where we had the most longest period of COVID lockdowns, and yeah, so it was quite a liberal country, and also quite a secular part of the world as well.
All right. Well, welcome aboard, and Andrew, tell us, remind us who you are. We know who you are, but remind our viewers.
Yeah, so I'm based in Canada right now, in British Columbia. I'm originally from the States. I grew up in Michigan in Berrien Springs, and I've been working as a Bible worker for 5 years now. I'm a traveling speaker, evangelist, a revivalist, and that's kind of what I do. And I actually lived in Melbourne, Australia for about a year.
Oh, wow.
Back in the mid 90s. And when I saw the lockdowns going on there, and I saw the reports and people knocking on doors for Facebook posts and everything, I was like, I'm glad I didn't stay in Melbourne.
So, and I'm in Michigan, USA. So here we all are. Well, welcome aboard. This is going to be a little bit different from some of the things we've done in the past because there's a sense in which this could be a little bit, I don't want to use the word speculative, but I mean, we're trying to look ahead based on some things that we are seeing, actual things we are seeing today, and looking ahead into the months just before us now. And yeah, we could be looking at something kind of interesting. So let me throw a few bits up here, and I think Andrew, you've got some slides, but I want to bring up just some reminders to us here. You might remember that in 2020, that was called the mostly peaceful summer. So this is a picture that was painted somewhere of George Floyd. You probably don't need nobody probably needs a refresher on the ideas that surrounded the tragic death of George Floyd. And but at that time, this, and I think one thing we're potentially looking at is the use of some very sad events at different times to promote other objectives, maybe a state level or geopolitical objectives. So let me whip through a few of these slides here for us. Now, I didn't label them all. This, I believe, is from Kenosha, Wisconsin, actually just across the lake from me here in Michigan, where there was burning, riots, cars, deaths, shootings, burnings, and a famous shooting happened here. What do we got here? I can't remember if that's, this is, I don't remember offhand where that one's from, but these are all from the so-called peaceful summer of 2020. This is a building that was burned out in Waukesha or Kenosha, Wisconsin. We also had, of course, a number of autonomous zones. We had Chaz and Chop, I think Capitol Hill, I'm trying to remember what the OP was, Capitol Hill Space, and before that it was Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, Chaz. There were autonomous zone in Washington, D.C., in several of our cities besides Seattle and Chicago, different places. So these were some of the things that we saw. Yeah, this is, again, the Capitol Hill, the Chaz Autonomous Zone, where basically the police withdrew and the mayor, mayors allowed it to happen. And we had basically anarchic type, in the worst sense of that, type cities where there was just mayhem and chaos. Yeah, and here's where we get this one was from Kenosha, the riots that were in Kenosha and all the stuff that happened there. And this is where we get our phrase for tonight's podcast, that this fellow was standing in front of these buildings and automobiles that are going up in flames. But he reported, yeah, there's some fires going on, but it's mostly a peaceful protest. And it sort of became a meme for kind of the way that the media would understate things. Now, where we are today, okay, this is still from that time. This is an interesting map I found where somebody put it together, political violence, demonstrations, and what they called strategic developments through basically the summer of 2020. And you can see all through the United States, there was a large number of protests and different riots. And I don't think they listed the autonomous zones all on here, but different things like that happening here in America. So these are some of the bits that we have experienced those years ago. And since then, there've been a few little blips. But what are we seeing now? And I'm just kind of laying out the groundwork for our discussion from the rest of our time together today. These are automobiles manufactured by Tesla, which is associated, of course, with the widely known Elon Musk. There are automobiles, Teslas at dealerships, individually owned Teslas and so on that are being burned, mutilated. Actually, there was a number of images that I chose not to put into this slide deck because they had swastikas on them, and One time I had the temerity to put on Facebook a German helmet that had a little tiny swastika on it, and I got into all kinds of trouble for that. So I've sort of left out the nasty symbols here, but there's a lot of these being painted on Teslas. This is in Canada, Andrew. It's happening in Canada, and not only America, but in Canada and other places. I know there was a kind of an assault on Tesla automobile manufacturing in Germany. These are superchargers operated by Tesla to charge these electric vehicles. They were burned up. I think that one was California. Anyway, some scenes there kind of reminiscent of the summer, the mostly peaceful summer of 2020. This is inside the subway in London. They're putting up stickers and things attacking Elon Musk. And again, lots of these with swastikas and things I didn't risk putting onto our podcast today. But anyway, just some pictures of what's going on. Now, it seems to be pretty much centered on Musk and the cars that he manufactured, but a whole bunch of people. I mean, this is a publicly owned company. There's stock. People own it, and yet if people are burning cars, they are keying them, destroying the paint jobs. What's interesting is that every one of these automobiles is by design, it is equipped with numerous cameras. So they're catching most of the people that are, a number of the people that are doing this, basically this domestic, I don't call it domestic violence, but this violence is attacking that. Now we're pretty much attacking, we're seeing the flames and this trouble pretty much centered on the idea of Elon Musk and Tesla. And I'm not here to, I don't believe Musk is a big help to us. Hopefully he will be, but I'm not counting on that, because if sometime we need to talk about technocracy and things, transhumanism and stuff like that, and we'll find there's some reason to be very careful of people like Elon Musk. Although I see things Musk does that I like them, but maybe we'll get into this further tonight. Anyway, I'm wondering if this is limited to Elon and his things associated with him, or if we are entering a time again where we're going to have the first mostly peaceful summer since 2020. And then as Christian believers, all of us here, how are we going to relate to this? And so we just thought we would take a glance at this today and see where we are. So let me see here in terms of setups here. I don't think I have a good one with all three of us in it. There, well, that'll work. All right. So anyway, guys, hopefully we'll forget about this podcast later, and there'll be all this stuff will stop happening. But what if we're looking at another 2020 type scenario where we have rioting, people killed, and violence? And what if that's used as a geopolitical method in this year? Where might we be? Where might we be going? We all kind of have an interest in prophecy and watching the world that we are in. So I want to just sort of carry on and see what your thoughts are, and maybe there's even new incidents since I grabbed these slides, most of these this afternoon. But I know this is developing on almost an hourly basis. So I don't know what your thoughts are. And again, we're coming from an American standpoint, an Australian standpoint, and a Canadian standpoint. So who wants to say something? What are you thinking? Am I pulling things together that are just totally different, or might we be on to something? God forbid.
I think it's quite shocking. This is quite shocking to me. I think violence and the way they're going about trying to achieve their agenda or their desires, I don't think it's a right way to go about it at all. And yeah, it does seem to be the same crowd of people that are responsible for these various acts of violence that have been taking place in 2020 or this year. And why this is especially surprising to me is in Australia, although we do have protests and we do have, a lot of the same ideologies and ideas, and including left-wing liberal ideas as well happening in Australia. This particular attack against Tesla, we actually have not had, at least to my knowledge, we haven't had attacks against Tesla vehicles taking place in Australia. I learned about this happening in the United States from yourself, Larry, and I think, yeah, it's quite shocking. It's a surprise to me. And we do have Tesla vehicles in Australia. We do have Tesla charging ports. But it's interesting that, yeah, although we have a lot of the same ideas, we do have, even protesters pushing for leftist and liberal ideas. In Australia, we haven't had this particular violence, at least to my knowledge. Like, I get, or maybe it's happening, but it's just not covered in the news in Australia. I do get news feed on YouTube, Australian news. This has not been a topic on Australian news, at least as far as I have seen so far, only other parts of the world.
Interesting. So it's not even really on the news there.
No, it's not.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I was just thinking, you mentioned my Canadian perspective, but I always like to remind people I'm actually an American, and I have an Australian perspective. I'm actually a dual national. I'm actually a tri-national now. My mom's Australian, and so that's why I lived there for a while. But so
okay, trilateral not so much.
And trilateral not so much. But I am an American first. I'm a natural born American, and so when I'm looking at what's happening, even from across the border, it kind of really digs kind of into me because I'm separated by a distance and by a border, but it really does feel very personal too. And I know that from a perspective of a Christian and a Bible believing Christian in prophecy, that these things have got to happen. They're going to happen. They're going to absolutely happen, and it's going to get worse. So when, you had this idea for this podcast about, Mostly Peaceful Summer Part 2, I was thinking, well, really, this is a great opportunity to talk about what we really know is going to end up happening. Why are these things happening? Many people question why is, when COVID hit and, and we saw the whole world convulsed in this drama, and every government in the world lockstep with each other did something about it very similar. And so many people started to wake up and start thinking, why is this happening? What's really going on? So I think, it's good to remind ourselves that even though it might just be in the US right now with Tesla, perhaps a bit in Canada as well, this whole thing that's really going on is a global thing right now, that the world is being engineered into a place to accept a future that they have prepared for us. And it's not just a geopolitical thing, it's actually a spiritual, religious thing as well.
I had an article I almost put up here, but it had swastikas in it, if I recall. It was an MSNBC article, and it said that the headline was on this line, government unable to link, no, it was something like Musk and Trump claim this is linked to it's coordinated violence, but they went on, and the headline went in and said there's no evidence this is coordinated. It's just totally spontaneous that suddenly in Europe and in America, people are all burning up automobiles and vandalizing automobiles from one manufacturer. I guess it's just a big coincidence. Just started happening. Oh, hate it when that happens. But anyway, I didn't put it in the links here for us. Yeah. Geopolitically, and this, I don't want to veer way off the line. I want to come back, Andrew, to I think you've got a good angle for us here on this. But just to bump out a notch perspectively, geopolitically, what is achieved? Why would this be a target, or why would this be the beginning of potentially another mostly peaceful summer? Possibly. What is it? Is there anything about 2025 that has particular similarities to 2020? There must be some similarities and some strong dissimilarities. But as we're thinking about this, Why would it's happening in many places. Absolutely. I mean, there's websites, and I decided not to put the links to them up here, but there are websites and places that are promoting and organizing and networking these people to destroy and burn these particular cars. So yeah, there is coordination, whether anybody wants to say there is or not. And since there's coordination on a multinational scale, because I know that in Germany and in England, there are giant attacks again against Musk and his enterprises. Because there's something happening internationally, I think that it's valid for us to pause, at least briefly, and say what geopolitically might be, why would this be happening? And it's interesting if we have rent-a-mobs and things like that happening, which are supposedly, just spontaneous, and yet there's evidence that this is engineered. We could have paid rioters and stuff happening in different places. So I'm not here today I'm not here to build up give all the evidence for that. I'm just trying to look at what it might mean for us in the work of Christianity.
Yeah, I mean, if you zoom out just a little bit wider than 2020 to 2025, and maybe look at, let's just focus on America for just a second and think of it in a geopolitical sense as well, because what's been happening in the U.S. probably for a good 40 some years is a polarization in politics that has been very much, fueled by the media. And, I find, for example, when I travel in places and I go to small towns and I go to, places that are off the, the beaten path, and I've been to many places in the U.S. and some places in Canada too, there's a sort of distance from that sort of reality that's on the news as far as people always at each other's throats. I don't always see that as much. It seems to be more fueled in the news cycle and in the talking points to basically agitate people up against each other to the point where they're willing to sort of fight each other and sort of, light Teslas on fire. And really, it's an agitation in the population to, I think, create some sort of a new world order. The idea is that, the things that are happening today are no longer working. It's broken. This side's broken, the other side's broken, the other side sees the other side as the greatest enemy in the world. And to the point where, that it's worth, using violence to get your way or to change the narrative because you don't like where it's going. And I feel like that's what's happening even globally too, where people are just being squeezed. And there's a financial, aspect to this as well with the economy, not just in the U.S., but in other countries as well, where there's, there's peaks and valleys, but there's definitely a downward trend for people's upward mobility. And so again, cycles, is this 2.0? Well, you look at bigger cycles that are taking place through time. And there's a direct relation to what the goal is. We know prophetically what is going to happen on this planet, and it's going to bring the planet together in some sort of a new world order in one system, and it's going to have a religious dimension to it. So politically, I think that, everybody's sort of, coming from a different background with a different culture, but ultimately they're going to achieve the same thing. And and we're all humans, regardless of our cultural background, our religious differences. We are humans and we have basic needs and, things like food and water and shelter and comfort and
Right.
peace and things like that. And you start taking these things away and you start turning your neighbors against each other, then, it becomes such an agitation that there has to be some solution to this. And then, obviously, Hegelian dialectic, you have thesis and antithesis, and then you have the synthesis, which everyone is just desperate to accept because it's so much better than what we've just been through for the last, however long you want to say.
That's true. And what's interesting is you step back, whether we call it a new world order or maybe we call it a new global system or what have you. But we look at Revelation 18 and we see there combined three elements, maybe four. The nations is the fourth element, but we see the Babylon, all false religion. Then we have the kings of the earth, the political, governmental leaders and so on, political this and that. And we have the merchants of the earth, which, as I keep telling my church, I think they've finally learned it now, mega, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon. Our lives would be very different without that mega, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon. And so we have, those are the merchants of the earth, those people plus wealthy people, those giant corporations, I guess, including Tesla. I think Tesla's has been doing pretty well until lately. So yeah, as you step back, you see these agents, Babylon, kings of the earth, merchants of the earth, combining together in a very complete, in a very integrated way. And as we look out on the world and we see these spontaneous, totally random things happening all at the same time to the same stuff, yeah, it looks as though there's something. These three elements are combined to benefit what they say. What is the saying? Follow the money. Who benefits? And as we look at who benefits, the people who want to spin or adjust the world order into a different fashion than what it has been. Not that what it has been perfect at all, but where we're going might be dramatically worse even than where we've been. Yeah, what do they gain by, or what do they lose if things keep on in the direction they're going, and what are they trying to bend? Without being too speculative, any thoughts on that from you folks?
I'm going to give my brother from Australia an opportunity to speak. I have been speaking so much. But actually, you know what? Maybe if I can just jump in, just a little diversion. Sorry. I had this burning question in my heart for Liam, my brother there in Australia. So I want to know, what has it been like for how this has shaped the culture there in your country since 2020 and now coming, maybe the Tesla thing's not happening where you are, but just we're talking about the cycles and things happening. How has it shaped, I mean, obviously it's probably changed a bit since I was there in the 90s, but how has it shaped the culture there and the feeling, and not just, Christians and the attitudes of people that are like believers, but generally in Australia, how has it affected Australians there? What's happened?
Yeah, we're 4 or 5 years downstream now from the big 2020. And so, yeah, you were right in the thick of it there in Victoria area, Liam. So yeah, there must be some wake, some things that are still there. Tell us what your thinking is.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest differences I've noticed from 2020 onwards in Australia, and especially in the state of Victoria, is the loss of freedom and also freedom of speech, and new laws, even completely outside of the COVID situation, new laws that have been coming in that have been taking away more and more of our freedoms, especially in the area of freedom of speech. And as a person that appreciates freedom, it's something that is a little bit disheartening, more or less. And just a caveat in regards to what I mentioned about my lack of knowledge of any attacks against Tesla taking place in Australia. For the most of this March, and currently right now at the moment, I'm actually overseas. So that could be contributing to my lack of knowledge. I still watch the news on YouTube, some of the news on YouTube of what I see happening in Australia, news from Australia, news platform from Australia. But as far as I've seen so far, they haven't reported anything in regards to Tesla. So that I just wanted to mention that caveat on the point of Tesla. But yeah, what I think is quite unfortunate in regards to what's been happening around the world on the politically left side is that, have you heard of the saying that truth is inherently more stronger than error? And those that are on the side of error, or those that are on the side opposite to truth, because error is weaker than truth, inherently speaking, what they lack in truth and what they lack in logic and reason and weight of evidence, they can often try to make up with the use of brute force and violence and cancel culture. And I think that has been quite an unfortunate direction that many people on this planet Earth have been going towards. I think that's quite unfortunate, and we're seeing the fruits of that.
So you would say that there have been some substantial continuing suppression of freedom of speech type things there in Australia. Even though the things of 2020 are long gone, some of the speech suppression is still substantial.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
I can say that, in Canada, it has actually gotten worse in that way too. There have been there's more legislation that's been introduced, in the last few years, kind of going with that, with the whole dealing with misinformation and things like that. So there has been more of a clamp down here too. So it has changed Canada too, since I've been here, I can say. So I came here in late 2016. So it's been about 9 years, and it's changed. It really has changed. And it was sad to see it change, because for a while we thought we were sort of isolated even from what's happening in the States. And, we were seeing what was happening in Australia, and we were gobsmacked. I mean, it was really hard to watch. It was scary. And sure enough, some crazy things happened here. And, it just,
so
just reminded, nowhere's really safe, in a sense, what's going to happen.
We want to get over to your some of the more ideas that you were sharing with us, but or ready to share with us. But just to finish this topic, this point, would you say that the changes in suppression of speech are those purely legal or media driven, or are those is some of that self-suppression? Like I've already admitted that in the slides I was preparing for this, there were some that had certain imagery on it that I chose not to include, simply because in the past I had noticed that the media I put up had been blocked because it had a little tiny swastika on it. And so I chose not to do that. So I guess that counts a little bit as self-censorship. But are you talking about self-censorship and the more media pressing down censorship, or government pressing down, or are you just talking about government pressing down?
It's been more a fact that there's legislation that's ready to go and that's been passed that can really clamp down on what you do on the internet. It's becoming more draconian. I think, I should add a nuance there. I think that what actually happened during this time period in Canada was that I think Canadians realized that they were not maybe as free as they thought they were. Because, when things happen like the truckers' protest and bank accounts were frozen and all sorts of, people were kind of shocked. And I think Canadians were, I know for a while, people were very, excited about what was happening in Canada, because it seemed like, the Canadians were really standing up and doing something. But
blessed by the trucks.
Yeah, well, there was a bit of a lick to pay at the end, because the clampdown on that was long and heavy, and I think it woke a lot of people up. So in some ways, I think it's caused some people to become more active in some ways, but in some ways too, I think people were just more aware now of what can happen. And so I think there's a little bit of all of that, being careful and self-censoring.
Some of the machinery was already there. We just didn't realize it. Not only there, but here in America, and obviously in Victoria, we got to see deep into the dystopian future. Let's see here. Those are mine. Where's no those? Let's see here. I think I was trying to add your slides. Let's take mine away, and let's see if we can get.
Oh, there they are. Yeah.
Yeah, get yours in here too, whenever you want them. I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, this is, the first thing that came to my mind when we were talking about doing this, was this Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, verses 9 through 11.
Okay.
And it's just, it's something that I share when I do, evangelism and Bible studies. It's something I try to introduce fairly early on in the studies, is that, history is repeating, because you're trying to introduce the great controversy, the frame of reference of what's really happening behind the scenes spiritually, why everything is going the way it is in this world, especially at the end, is this idea that, there's nothing really new under the sun. There's something that's very old that's been playing out for millennia, this battle between good and evil. And so, what has been done is what will be done. That which is done is what shall be done. There is no new thing under the sun. So, 2025, I mean, there's really nothing new. It has already been, and it's just repeating. And the thing in verse 11 is that, there's no remembrance of former things. Neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come with those that shall come after. So it's like we forget, even within our own lifetime, within a generation, of what took place before, and we seem to keep repeating these things. And the Bible speaks in typology of history repeating, so that we would understand what's going to happen in Babylon in Revelation. We know from reading Daniel what happened in Babylon in ancient times, or even in Genesis what happened with the Tower of Babel, that those things are going to come again, because God says Babylon at the end. Babylon in the early days is the same as Babylon in the later days, but yet greater and more worldwide. So that's something that I think that, is an opportunity for us to share with other people with these things. I think is a proactive approach to what's going on in the world is to find out how we can use these things and share the knowledge from the Word of God with others of what's going to happen in the near future. Because when you start to plant seeds about what's going to happen, you can provide a lot of opportunities to reach people with truth. Because when they start to see these things come upon the earth that the Bible speaks of, they're going to be very open to hear what prophecy actually says. So, the other quote that really came to my mind was this one from the book Education. And this is, I think a lot of people know this one. This is from chapter 25. And interestingly enough, and the reason I wanted to share this is because of what is around it. But here's the main quote that most people know. At the same time, anarchy is seeking to sweep away all law, not only divine, but human, the centralizing of wealth and power, the vast combinations for the enriching of the few at the expense of the many. You can see that happening today. In fact, essentially the culmination of this is Revelation 18, the economic situation in that. Yeah. The combinations of the poorer classes for the defense of the interests and their claims, willing to set Teslas on fire and do all sorts of things. The spirit of unrest, of riot, and of bloodshed. The worldwide dissemination of the same teachings, and here's history repeating, that led to the French Revolution. All are tending to involve the whole world in a struggle similar to that of which convulsed France. And so I've always thought of that quote as very, very interesting, because when we study the French Revolution and what took place to bring it to that point, we realize that that is exactly what's going to happen worldwide. And so when we look at what's happening, just not in 2025, but in 2020 and going further back, what's been happening in history all around the world, it's basically laying the seeds for there to be a worldwide revolution, or at least a worldwide convulsing like it was in the Revolution, the French Revolution. That's pretty scary. I mean, that's really where we're headed, and there's going to be Matthew chapter 24 talks about, the sorrows, right, which are birth pangs. Birth pangs, they come in waves, right? There's a peak of activity, then there's a quieting, and then there's a peak. And then, of course, the birth pangs, they start to get one on top of the other. I've not given birth myself. I've had 3 children, so I'm familiar with the Braxton Hickses. I'm familiar with when the water breaks, and then they get closer to closer, and then the child's on the way. And this same analogy is true for us. So when we see something happening again, maybe in 2025 that happened in 2020, these things are coming closer and closer together, and we're headed to something very serious. Now, the thing that I found interesting about when I looked at this quote, I looked at the chapter title, and it was called Character Building. Now, that's interesting, character building, because we know that really ultimately what's being taking place in the plan of salvation is God is restoring to man the original character he gave to him in Eden. And I thought, well, this is an interesting thing, because we're kind of coming to a climax. So I looked at the very next paragraph, and it says, such are the influences to be met by the youth of today. To stand amidst such upheavals, they are now to lay the foundations of character. So there's this message of what's going to come at the very end of time, and then there's this idea that in the midst of all of this upheaval and all of this world convulsing together, it's now the time the youth of today are going to lay the foundations for their character. And I said, well, I better back up a little bit. So I went back just a little bit further, and I went back a few paragraphs, and I said, as the youth go out into the world, to encounter the allurements to sin, the passion for money getting, for amusement, indulgence, for display, for luxury, for extravagance, the overreaching, fraud, robbery, and ruin. Think of this, sounds like exactly like the world you go off into today to enjoy the world. What are the teachings there to be met? Next paragraph. Spiritualism asserts that men are unfallen demigods. For some reason, I thought of Musk there for some reason. That's another conversation about him. That each mind will judge itself, that true knowledge places men above the law, that all sins committed are innocent, for whatever is right, and God doth not condemn. The basest of human beings is represented as in heaven, and highly exalted there. Thus it declares to all men, it matters not what you do, live as you please, heaven is your home. Multitudes are thus led to believe that desire is the highest law, that license is liberty, and that man is accountable only to himself. And then there's one more paragraph there. With such teaching given at the very outset of life, when impulse is strongest, the demand for self-restraint and purity is urgent. Where are the safeguards of virtue? What is to prevent the world from becoming a second Sodom? And so when I saw this tied to the quote about the world being reconvulsed in a sense like France was in the French Revolution, I thought, what is really laying the groundwork for all of this to happen? And I was thinking about, the agitations of the bricks being found near the places where the buildings were burned out, like you mentioned,
Right.
and all these things. But actually, really, the foundation for this to actually really be taking place is the demoralization of our society.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that just when you applied, or at least made an application of the text in Ecclesiastes 1, where the things have already been, and we don't even remember the things that happened. I noticed as I was kind of researching back this. I mean, this is 4 or 5 years ago. We're hardly even 5 years ago, and yet to go back and see these images and research out these images and CHOP and CHAZ and the autonomous zones and all that. Was bringing to my mind a lot of things I had largely forgotten. And yet today there's a whole generation of people, and a lot of our young people, when the events of 2020 started, I try not to use sometimes the C word there. When the things there began, a lot of people were 10, 11, 12 years old, and now we're 4 or 5 years down the way. A lot of people grew up in the middle of that, and they have no serious recollection of how things were pre-2020. And so the world that we live in today, with these sudden, spontaneous movements, like we had in the summer of 2020, riots, and suddenly everything criminal is allowed, and yeah, there's a lot of those pieces there that is like, if you grew up there and you're 16 now, how would you know what normal was? Because normal to you would be shaped by what you've experienced in this last 4 years. So we're just in a pretty queer place. And to go back to this idea of character development, there's all kinds of things that we just have lost a lot of self-control, and there's nothing out there to really stimulate us to come back to self-control. But Christianity does. But a lot of people, in the middle of the night, they wake up. I've done it. You've probably done it. You wake up, and if your phone's within reach, you will go over there and look at your phone in the middle of the night, and you'll spend 20 minutes looking at this and that when you should be sleeping, and you're suppressing the sleep hormone, and you're not doing yourself any favors. And so we have to learn to exercise self-control all over again, because we have our bright, shiny things that we all have to have. And we're just living in a time when character development, not emphasized, not even understood. Why develop character? Because look, this is basically a big party, right? This is all you get, this life, there's nothing beyond. So eat your blueberry pie now while you can, because someday you'll be dead and there'll be no more blueberry pie. So soak it up, do whatever you want, live like an animal or an insect, and then you're done.
Yeah.
And there's something much, much more than that for people today.
Yeah, I want to circle back to what you mentioned earlier in the program, where you asked about like what's going on globally as far as, like internationally with all of this coordination, because it's really something that's a lot more subtle, and it kind of ties in with the quote from Education. Just an example. I was in Hollywood, for 25 years in the entertainment business, and I had my favorite directors, and I was paying attention to that. That was my world and my culture. And there was a director I like Akira Kurosawa, a Japanese director, and I read his biography a long time ago when I was in the business, and he talked about what it was like in Japan during World War II. And they would get some of these American films and they would watch them. And particularly it was Fantasia, Disney's Fantasia. And he said he remembers watching Disney's Fantasia. And when he saw the level of sophistication, not just in the work of the animation, but in the concept and the feeling in what was going on in the movie, he said he knew at that moment Japan was going to lose the war. And I thought, what has happened to Japan since the war? What has happened to the world since World War II? And, this goes back to this idea of Revelation 13, that this second beast that comes up out of the earth is going to form an image to the original one. And you think about the Roman Empire is really still the fourth beast that's really, truly behind everything in the world. It's this culture. It's the entertainment culture. It's this what's being described in, the book Education as what's going on culturally in the world, demoralizing the world. It's actually through this mechanism that the world is becoming softened to kind of fall into what it is today. It really is it's a crumbling of civilization. And just like Rome crumbled, just like you study Rome, the history of Rome with the Caesars and the Senate and all the things that were going, bread and circuses, paying them off by just giving them the bread and circuses, and the corruption that was taking place. It's like we're repeating it. United States is a reflection of exactly what it was like in Rome, and just the way that Rome was. I mean, Rome was all about business and all about protecting, and had a network that it worked. And the U.S. is very similar to that ever since, coming up out on the scene, obviously, 1798. But really, since World War II, being able to project its power globally, and at the same time, its culture, it's Hollywood, it's the music business, it's all of that, and that's, if something's really changed in the world in the last, few decades, it's the internet bringing that culture into the rest of the world in many places that it never would have gotten if it wasn't for this internet, real-time communication and internet. And so it's the softening of the morals of the world in a sense. And, the main thing behind it is Western civilization. There's really Hollywood, is the United States. And so that's, I think, really the mechanism behind a lot of it.
I don't do a lot of traveling, but I remember not so many years ago, I was traveling and I was coming through Tokyo, and I remember just seeing the men and the women in Tokyo they just looked like it looked like the weirdest place in California, that the people had been thrown into a bucket and then just kind of squeezed out at the bottom, and these Tokyo people, Japanese people I saw in Tokyo, had fallen out. They had colored hair and metal sticking out of their face, and every which thing that was current.
They want steak. They want American whiskey.
The homogenization of culture down into one sort of gray, putrid mass, and then you see it in Europe. I was just in Europe I'm not a big traveler, but I'm just in Europe. And so you see these things all over. Wherever you are, it's just this blurring and this transmission of culture everywhere. And it's not, by and large, it's not like it's Bible culture. It's some other very absurd blend. But anyway.
But for the record, I just want to say I really do love Japan. Japan
is
it's one of my favorite countries I've ever been. I mean, it's an amazing country, amazing people. But you can just see that the rot is setting in everywhere in the world.
Right, it's bad. I'm unhappy because America is one of the key sources of that rot. So yeah, I'm not trying to beat up on Japanese people.
Not at all. No, it's the lamb-like beast is doing the work that prophetically it said it would do.
So mostly peaceful summer 2.0. What if this summer we move from burning Teslas and that's bad enough. I mean, sooner or later, if things keep on the way they're going these past few weeks, you're going to have, a mother with infants in the child seats, and some people are going to die in some totally ridiculous, mindless, evil way. So these things, this is very, very dangerous. But anyway, if we get into a summer 2.0, as Christians, what are some of the takeaways for us? can we, okay, one thing, can we say, don't worry about it, God's on his throne, which is true, but the geopolitics, it doesn't matter to us. We'll just, if some government guy stands in the corner and hands us millions of dollars, should we just take it and use it for supposedly good things? Or how can we not be used as propaganda? How can we not have our things we're trying to do as the hands and feet of Jesus? How can we keep ourselves from being used as tools to bring perhaps an ungodly piece to fruition, that we're just kind of the tools along the way that actually contribute to a bigger thing? Like, for example, I mean, here's an easy one, right? Should Christians today go out and start keying Teslas? Should we start burning superchargers? Should we, because we're unhappy with Elon Musk for whatever reason? Should we join in to those kinds of behaviors? Are those behaviors that are valid, maybe even remotely valid for Christians?
Well, go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
We're not hearing you, Liam.
I think you're muted, Liam.
Just looking to see if I
My
can.
apologies about that. I was saying that, those kinds of behaviours and that course of action of, violence is a kind of course of action that we as Christians should never take. We should never be involved in that kind of vandalism where we're destroying Teslas or we're destroying Tesla charging ports in order to convey some kind of message, or try to make it so that we get our own way. And in regards to your earlier part of your question, Larry, in regards to what can we as Christians do in this world during this time when these kinds of things can happen? Also, when these kinds of things are happening, and when the world's getting worse in this kind of direction, I'm very appreciative of the education quotation, the book of education quotation that Andrew brought up. And I find it very interesting, as Andrew pointed out, that in the surrounding context of that statement in regards to events similar to what took place during the French Revolution are going to take place in the future, that character building was something that was mentioned in that context. And I think during this time when so much chaos is happening around the world, we as Christians ought to use this as an opportunity for revival and reformation, because it's through trials and during tough times that God is able to use those things to transform us and furnish us and refine us and to make us more and more like Christ. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if that particular scenario of events similar to the French Revolution happening in the future. If you remember that Andrew mentioned the Hegelian dialectic, if we swing towards the direction of the world moving towards a French Revolution-like civilization, or those kinds of events happening, after it goes into that very atheistic, secular direction, it makes it very easy for the devil to swing things in the opposite direction, where the world becomes very religious all of a sudden, if they come to regret all the chaos they caused, and we have demons impersonating the apostles and trying to deceive people that because you went in that atheistic direction, it was a bad thing, and then the demons impersonating the apostle push for a false form of Christianity and use that, one really, really bad extreme to work itself into the opposite, really, really bad, negative extreme, resulting in the image of the beast.
Right. I just want to mention to our viewers that are on YouTube, feel free to type in any questions or comments you have so that we can react to that.
And what Liam mentioned, or actually, with the swinging the pendulum, and this is exactly how we repudiate our own freedoms that we cherish today. We end up giving away free speech. We end up giving away liberty of conscience. We end up giving those things away for a greater good, because it was so bad when it went this way with it that you swing back the other direction and freedoms are taken away. and it's being engineered, and that's absolutely what's happening. And I think there's a great danger that we as Adventists get stuck. I didn't bring the quote with me today, but there's a quote that talks about us not even being involved in peaceful things that are going to tend towards, supporting a national Sunday law. We can, there's temperance, there's, prison reform, which was a big thing back in the 1800s, was prison reform. That was one of the things. And so these are good things that as Christians, we can agree with. But the thing is, we know we're not even supposed to join those movements, let alone burning Teslas. So, I mean, the counsel that we're given is actually pretty strong, is to really not become a part of the political upheaval.
That Rod Dreher's book, Live Not by Lies, he says, he gives us really the best definition of totalitarianism. And it's something like this, where he says, totalitarianism is the politicization of everything. If you stop and think about that, I'm going to circle back around to what we were just talking about. When you take your keys out, and why is it that you would take your keys out and come up and decide, and you can see all these videos, they're all the same. Okay, so you can see either usually you see the whole person, because all these cars are equipped with a camera. And first the person comes out, they stop. And then they look this way, and then they look that way. And that's the telltale sign that they know what they're about to do is there's something wrong with it. It's not just about not getting caught, but I think that, we all have, unless we've grieved away the Holy Spirit completely, we have conscience. So they look this way and they look that way, and they think they're not on camera. They are. And then they take the key and they whip themselves along the car and, knock their little scratch into the paint job, or even write in a swastika or some other nasty message. That was another reason I didn't share all those pictures, because a lot of them had swearing messages. But when you're doing that, when you're in that mind frame, aren't you thinking, it could be just visceral in the moment. I'm doing this, makes me feel good, I'm striking back. But I think some people who are doing that, even though they're convinced that maybe something in their conscience is telling them, by the way, this isn't it, don't do this. Some part in their worldview perhaps is telling them, I am striking a blow for what's right. I'm doing the right thing. I'm making a difference for the right side. And in other words, Isaiah 5? There's a curse. Those who call righteousness evil and evil righteousness, those people, there's a special problem that God has with those people. And for somebody to do that, after checking that I'm not, nobody can see me do this, and then you go through and do it. There's something about that, and again, I think people they think they're doing something that's good, and yet it's totally I'm missing the word now. There's a disconnect there between the conscience part A and part B. What I'm doing is not right, but I'm doing it because it's right. And when we have that, we circle back around to this question, which you commented to a moment ago. This is an opportunity for us to learn how to live by a life of Christian character, how to resist this incoming, because who decided it was wrong, that it was okay to destroy property or burn down buildings in 2020 or have a big riot or take over the downtown of a city? How is that? Anyway, I guess I'm coming back to the question, how can we make sure that we as Christians are shaped by God, so that we don't lose sight of what's right and what's wrong, and we don't feel like, in this moment I'm going to go ahead and I feel like doing this. Now they're vomiting on Teslas. There's pictures of people out there painting and even sticking their finger down their throat, trying and actually throwing up and rubbing their. Sorry. Anyway,
well, there's worse ones. There's actually worse than that. There's actually worse than that. Yeah. I don't want him. I'm even going to allude to what I'm talking about.
Let's not even go there.
Let him go there. But Boy, you know what? It's, by beholding, you become changed, right?
Well, we're apparently beholding some bad stuff, some bad mojo, because we're becoming changed, and we don't even know what's right and wrong anymore. Although I guess we do, because, am I being watched? No, I'm not.
Yeah. Well,
So what
what
can
are
we
we?
do? How can we as Christians make sure we don't get poked out through the funnel into the gray mass of weird
I
badness?
Yeah, I think the way that the devil is getting a lot of people that would not want to do those things actually be broken down into those things is through politics. It's through the political agitation between the two sides rubbing against each other, where it's like it becomes so serious. I was caught up in a side when I was in Hollywood. You can probably guess which side that was, where you start to believe that the other side has absolutely lost their mind, and you just can't even acknowledge them anymore because you're just so crazy. They don't accept reality. And I'm not in that place at all. I'm completely not into politics at all. I've left that. I've repented a lot of the things that I used to think when I was in Hollywood, because if you didn't think like that in Hollywood, you're completely ostracized.
You were probably dead in the water in Hollywood if you didn't.
Oh yeah, as a career. Oh yeah, and I didn't do any of those things for a career. I mean, I was not really interested in that. But for sure, it was very much a controlled sort of political environment on sets and in the culture there. Anyway, it's the getting into the politics, because that's one of the things I noticed too when I came back to church and I kind of left politics, because I was a news junkie. I was following it all the time, WikiLeaks, everything that's happening, news blogs. I left that behind, and then I noticed within the church. I noticed that a lot of my brothers and sisters were really kind of paying attention to politics in a way where they were really caught up in a particular side of the political issue.
Maybe more involved or engaged or interactive, more receptive and tuned into politics than previously when you had been in the church.
Yeah, for sure. When I looked up, I just happened to see some of the people I went to school with back in Berrien Springs, like elementary school, and I just saw some of their profiles, and it was like Black Lives Matter. It was like, unicorns and rainbow flags. And I'm thinking, what happened? That was not in the milieu when I was in the 80s. I mean, certainly social justice gospels were coming as Andrews University in Berrien Springs. There's a lot of, things that kind of come through there first, right before it's spread everywhere through the education. But it was certainly not like it is today.
Yeah. So Liam, what are your thoughts? How can we not be shaped by by beholding we become changed? I think that's a principle that's been true all along, and has been the giant piece in all of our lives, if we just admit it. The things that we shaped. I mean, the things I watched when I was a kid, the TV shows, are deeply ingrained in my mind. And will be,
Yeah, that's a very good point.
or if you have a glorified body.
Very good point, very good saying. By beholding, we become changed. And it says in, I think it's 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. And with that being the case, we ought to be beholding Christ, keeping Christ in the center, making Jesus our first, our last, and our always. And especially studying the stories of the Bible, and studying not only the examples of Christ in not just Jesus, but other characters of the Bible, to give us an example and a standard of righteousness for us to live by. But there's also many examples in the Bible of people going through with the wrong example, or people going through with the wrong way of doing things. And by studying those mistakes, we can learn from those mistakes and do things the right way in our life. And I think if we were to be diligent to study God's word, be familiar with the example of righteousness and the times when the characters of the Bible got things right, as well as the examples of when people got things wrong, so we can learn from those mistakes and get things right ourselves. We can have a broad understanding of all of God's principles found in his word, and all the lessons and principles we learn from his word, and we become very familiar with that. I think that will act as a very good safeguard to protect us from falling for the many dangers, the many traps, the many wiles of Satan, and every wind of doctrine. It will protect us from all of that and keep us on the straight narrow path that Christ wants us to be on.
Is there anything that comes to mind that we can do on a local basis in your local church, your local congregation, where you probably have a circle of acquaintances, friends, your church family, old and young, whatever? Is there anything we can do on a local basis that could be a help to our own hearts, but also our brothers and sisters? We need to wrap up here coming up, but I just want to, again, try to veer over to the practical, because hopefully, we won't have a summer like this. Hopefully, like say, we'll forget about this all, and 5 months from now, we'll say, well, thankfully it didn't happen. They burned some Teslas and it stopped. But I'm suspicious that, by the time the things happened in 2020, by the time the summer of 2020 was over, we had Christians, even from our own church, our own denomination, marching in protest marches combined with some of the movements that were there at that time. It's not that they were marching, in support of what Paul said in Ephesians. They were not marching in because of what Jesus said in the gospel. They were marching because of the political things that were then current, and they had been so washed in the movement of the politicization of everything in the world that they were actually joining in. Whereas Andrew, you have mentioned, how much we need to be separated, just dramatically separated from the things the both of you said. So anyway, practically anything we can do on the local level before we polish it off here and call it a night.
I think, going back to, if we would be reacquainted, okay, I was born and raised a cultural Adventist, right? I was raised an Adventist. That's what I knew growing up. And I left the church. I came back to it, and I came back to it because it was the truth. I compared it with the world, and I went back to what I knew, and I realized I didn't really know why I was an Adventist because I was just born an Adventist. So I came back to be an Adventist by choice because of the truth. When we wake up to why we're here, where Christ is in the most holy place, that the judgment is going to move to the living soon, that the world will be convulsed like it was in France during the Revolution, and that there's things that are happening, that we have a certain purpose here, and there's the character building part, all of this together. When we realize as a church who we are and what we're for, our early pioneers were brought together to announce the opening of the judgment. They didn't realize it. They thought it was the second coming, but ultimately what they were doing was sounding the bell that the judgment had begun. We, in the latter end, as the bookend of the Advent movement, we are supposed to announce the close. If we focused on that, prophetic understanding, chain of events being fulfilled, Bible prophecy understood, the plain teachings of the gospel and what the plan of salvation is about, I think that we would have plenty to occupy ourselves where we would keep our heads straight and not be caught up. I think that's probably the most practical way to deal with this, is to get back to why we're here, because then we see the bigger picture and we don't get caught up in the minutia of the politics that is trying to drag us into a tidal wave that's going to take us in the undertow and take us out.
All right. Good thoughts. Liam, any closing thoughts also for you?
Yes. So in answer to your question, and it's a great question, two things come to my mind, which firstly is that every single one of us is a different part of the body of Christ. We all have our different spiritual gifts. We all have our different individual unique talents that another part of the body may or may not have. And I think it's important that every part of Christ's body recognize what are their spiritual gifts, what are their talents, and how can they use those talents and gifts in the most effective way possible to benefit God's kingdom and forward God's kingdom and share the gospel with others. And secondly, those parts of Christ's body that have special gifts in the area of like gifts of knowledge, gifts of spiritual knowledge, wisdom, discernment, and awareness of these issues that are taking place around the world, I think would be a very good idea for those people to help to educate and inform the other parts of the body to be able to discern right from wrong or spiritual dangers that might not be that obvious, so that those other parts of the body also can keep themselves safe from falling for those kinds of various traps of Satan, and help keep everyone on the path that Christ would like for everyone to be on, and to protect other parts of the body from getting distracted. So those parts of the body that have gifts of discernment and knowledge and wisdom, I think will be good for them to try to help safeguard the other parts of Christ's body from falling for the various traps of Satan that exist in the world, and play a role in keeping us all on the right path through education and the promotion of freedom of thought, because truth is inherently stronger than error, and truth welcomes being challenged. Truth can be challenged and stand the test. What can't stand the test is error. So if we promote an attitude of freedom of thought and freedom to be challenged, and for us all to be very open in our communications with one another, and doing so in a spirit of love and brotherly kindness, I think that would be greatly beneficial for Christ's kingdom here on earth, and will help us to work together as efficiently, Christ-like, and as best as possible.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Very good. Well, I think we want to finish off, and but let me just any of our viewers that want to connect with either of you, any projects you're doing or any web address, let me just give you the last moment to tell where people can find more from you or your work. Andrew, what's the URL for your website? Or
Sanctuary Door Ministry is www.sanctuarydoorministry.com, and that is where you can reach out to me and contact me. A lot of my material is there, but also there you can see on the screen there is the Truth Project. It's a podcast that I recently started doing as a co-host with Matthew Shawnshea, and we do a lot of current events, and we also do very deep Bible study. So that's a podcast that I'm doing. It's coming out on Fridays every 2 weeks. Our next podcast will be coming out this Friday. It'll be a part 2 on the sanctuary, what's going on in the sanctuary with the furniture and the sanctuary and the plan of salvation. So we're trying to do a ministry with the sanctuary as the focus, but also current events and, fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Very interesting. Liam, anything you want to share?
Yeah, sure. There is a ministry that I'm involved in that is affiliated with Graham Hood, and those that are pro-freedom Christians, especially in Australia, will be quite familiar with who he is. And the website for that ministry is called hoodiesbiblestudies.com, and Hoodies is spelled HOODYS, and then biblestudies.com. And there's also an email address of that same name, hoodiesbiblestudies, hoodiesbiblestudies@gmail.com. And it's a ministry where we try to support and network and provide Bible studies for pro-freedom Christians.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Truth needs to be suppressed by the forces against truth, because truth is so powerful as it stands on its own. The point that you've both made. I'm looking for truth attempts to suppress truth to proceed this summer and every summer until Jesus comes. But anyway, let us persevere in contending for the faith once for all delivered to the saints. May God bless you both and watch over you and all of our viewers today. May you be blessed, and let's keep the right thing. And that doesn't just mean Jesus as a label, but it means following Jesus and in concrete ways, making sure we're not pressed into and squeezed into the shape of this world, but instead we voluntarily seek and draw close to Jesus so that we're transformed into the shape. We become like him in character, as was brought out in our little meeting tonight. God be with you all. Thank you for joining us for the Remedial Protestantism podcast.
God bless.